case. I want to bring in Olivia Rubin, our investigative reporter. She was inside the courtroom for much of this case. She was in the courtroom as the verdict was read. Olivia, can you describe what you saw?
Well, the verdict did appear initially, David, to potentially catch Hunter Biden by surprise when they announced the very first guilty, the first of three. He had absolutely no reaction on his face. He did not even move. But by the time they announced the second and third guilty verdict, Hunter appeared to accept the verdict. He was nodding his head along as it was read out, appearing to, acknowledge that he had just been found guilty, nodding along as they were reading it out. And then it sort of turned into a bit of an acceptance potentially from Hunter, who turned and patted his lead attorney, Abby Lowell, on the back. He turned around and immediately shook the hands of his paralegals and then dismissed. It was a very brief reading of that verdict. He went around and hugged his legal team, and then he immediately went behind that barrier to grab a hold of his wife and hug his wife, which, David, I will say was one of the most striking aspects of this trial, was sort of the Biden family dynamic. The First Lady Jill Biden was here nearly every single day. His sister, Ashley, his aunt and uncle, the brother and sister of President Joe Biden, Valerie and Jimmy, had been in the courtroom as well. Jimmy was in the courtroom, but actually and again, strikingly, this was one of the times where we saw the least amount of Bidens in the courtroom. Just Jimmy Biden and his wife were in there. It appeared that potentially Valerie Biden was late and potentially missed the reading of the verdict. They sealed off that courtroom, and only after the verdict had been read did she rush down the aisle and go to greet Hunter's wife, Melissa. So some very striking dynamics in there. But again, Hunter sort of nodding along with that verdict.
Olivia, we're looking at pictures right now of First Lady Jill Biden. As you point out, she was there for the trial every day but one. She was not in the courtroom for the verdict?
She was not in the courtroom for the verdict, and I can tell you, David, as I sprinted out of the courtroom to come down to you as it was after wrapped up there, she was heading in just as I was heading out. She was rushing through that lobby, appearing, we don't know if they intended for her to not be here for Valerie, but it certainly does appear as if it's possible that they missed the reading of the verdict. It happened quite quickly from when it came down just after 11. Her clerk, the judge's clerk, came into the courtroom to say that the verdict had been reached, and just moments later, it was being read. And you could kind of almost sort of sense what that verdict was going to be initially when they walked the jury in. Again, something we have talked about before, the jury not looking at Hunter Biden. One of the jurors actually took his seat smiling, which was quite striking to see him smiling right before that verdict was read. But again, Jill Biden not in the courtroom. And again, the least amount of Bidens essentially that we have seen in the courtroom for the reading of the verdict.
First Lady not there for the verdict, though there just about every other day of this trial to show her support. Olivia, thank you for the color inside the courtroom. I'm going to bring in our chief Washington correspondent, Jonathan Karl. John, some shock from Hunter Biden's legal team here, and you've also heard from a very close confidant of Hunter Biden.
Yeah, the one-word response I got from a very close friend of Hunter Biden's is stunned, absolutely stunned. I had spoken to Hunter Biden's, some people in his inner circle in the hours leading up to this. They were confident that he would either be acquitted or there would be a hung jury. They thought that Abby Lowell, Hunter Biden's attorney, had made the case, had created reasonable doubt about whether or not he intentionally lied on that form, had pointed out that there had been no direct testimony that Hunter Biden was using drugs in the immediate days leading up to that gun purchase or for the 11 days that he owned the gun. They thought that this was going to result in acquittal. And I have to tell you, David, this is a trial, although President Biden was never in that courtroom. As you've pointed out, virtually every other member of the Biden family was there, and President Biden was clearly paying very close attention to this. He is incredibly close to his son. They speak virtually every day. And as we know, President Biden had said not long ago, when asked about all of this, all of the legal trouble swirling around Hunter, that his son had done nothing wrong. So while you had asked him, and he said that he would respect this jury verdict entirely, that he would not pardon his son. I am sure there are some interesting conversations happening right now inside the Biden family and at the White House. This is a clear blow to President Biden, and one that is not simply a political or legal blow, but a deeply personal one. And you should also consider that last summer, Hunter Biden believed, his entire legal team, the president, they all believed that he was on the verge of a plea agreement that would result in absolute immunity, that all of the legal troubles were behind him. Now you see he is going to face sentencing on these very serious charges and an entirely new trial on the tax charges in September. A huge, huge blow to the Biden family.
And in addition to what Hunter Biden now faces potentially with the sentencing now that will come next, John, you alluded to this point, and in interviewing President Biden, he said he would respect the outcome, and regardless of what you think about the president politically, we know we're in very polarized times in this country. What we do know is the president is very close to his son. He talks about this connection, that he is his lone surviving son, talking to him just about every day. And John, there's no question that this will deeply affect this president in the middle of this campaign for a second term.
Yeah, absolutely. You know how deeply hurt President Biden was when he lost his son, Beau, who died of brain cancer. Something that President Biden has said to people close to him when talking about Hunter is, "I'll be damned if I'm going to lose another one." He's deeply concerned about his son, Hunter, who went through that terrible drug addiction. That, by the way, I mean, I've read that memoir. I've read every page of Hunter Biden's memoir. It is a very stark portrayal of his own descent into crack addiction. There's no whitewashing. He talks about his incredibly irresponsible, reckless behavior. And here's a live picture. Yes, a live picture of Hunter Biden coming out of the courtroom right now. No doubt a stunned Hunter Biden.
Live pictures here in Delaware. You can see in the Wilmington courthouse, Hunter Biden leaving court, the First Lady, Jill Biden. It appeared that she was there among the group of people there for that moment, if I'm not mistaken. John Carl talking about the deeply personal connection the Bidens have with their son, given the fact that they lost Beau Biden some years back to brain cancer. John Carl also reporting a shock from a close family friend intimately following this case. And as we knew for several days in that courtroom, the First Lady in the courtroom to support her son, along with his wife, his daughter, friends of the Biden family moments ago. This is Hunter Biden leaving court. And as Terry Moran reported earlier, next up will come the sentencing. Now, he faces, given the seriousness of these crimes, up to 25 years behind bars. Dan Abrams, our chief legal analyst, telling us that is highly unlikely, though, given the fact that he's a first-time offender here. This is a first-time conviction, and given that nothing was done with the actual gun as far as a crime is concerned, other than the jury finding him guilty of lying about drug use when he purchased the gun. He said all of those factors might contribute to an outcome here where he would serve no time or a much smaller amount than what would be allowed in sentencing. I want to bring in our Chief Justice correspondent, Pierre Thomas. Pierre covers, obviously, the Justice Department, the Attorney General at arm's length from this case, but he did allow the U.S. Attorney who brought these charges, the U.S. Attorney who was put in that role during the Trump years, Merrick Garland, going out of his way, if you will, to try to demonstrate to the American people that this is not the Biden administration, this is the Justice Department. There is a separation here, and he allowed this case to move forward once the plea deal fell apart and for the case to be prosecuted.
David, this is an extraordinary moment in the sense of the Justice Department. They prosecuted the president's son. And as you pointed out, the Attorney General allowed a U.S. attorney appointed by former President Trump to pursue the case, made him special counsel, And they did not micromanage the case, but they knew full well the implications of what was going on. This is one of the most stressful things that a Justice Department could do. Again, we're talking about the son of the President of the United States, who's now facing these felony convictions. And David, I must tell you, as part of the team that helped break the story about the initial deal that fell apart, there was a lot of back and forth about whether Hunter Biden was getting a sweetheart deal from DOJ. And DOJ was very sensitive to that notion. But they won't say it out loud, but I think part of what is going on here is DOJ officials will hopefully see this as a sign, that the public will see this as a sign anyway, that DOJ follows the facts and the law without regard to who is subject to those facts and the law. And again, I cannot emphasize to you, this DOJ has been under probably more pressure than any DOJ in modern history. They were investigating the former president who's running for president. They launched and oversaw an investigation involving President Biden himself. And in this third investigation involving President Biden's son, again, DOJ, knowing that they're going to face criticism in this case from the left, there will be some people that said that this was a case that they would not normally bring without any kind of other significant crime attached to it. But DOJ allowed, again, the special counsel to pursue the case in the way that he wanted to, and now a conviction of the president's son.
Guilty on all 3 federal counts. Pierre Thomas, our Chief Justice Correspondent. Pierre, thank you. Let's get right over to Rachel Scott. She's live at the White House. Rachel, folks are going to be watching very closely any kind of reaction from the White House, the Biden administration, and of course, President Biden himself. And obviously, Rachel, these cases are vastly different. The case we witnessed a couple of weeks back with the former President Donald Trump, his guilty verdict. Now today, President Biden's son, Hunter Biden, with a guilty verdict in this case. Again, cases completely different. But one thing politically people will be looking at is the reaction. We know after the Trump verdict, a lot of rhetoric about a rigged system, you know, up against the former president. Those are the words being used by the campaign, the former president himself. And just a couple of days ago, on the other hand, the current president, President Biden, telling me in Normandy that he would respect the outcome and that, yes, he had ruled out a pardon. Now, whether or not that continues moving forward after this verdict, he is Hunter Biden's father, as we all know, but will they continue to try to paint a real contrast here when it comes to respect for the justice system as a whole?
And David, this verdict certainly flies in the face of everything that the former president has been pushing, trying to undermine the legal and the justice system. And we know President Biden has come out very strongly against that. And it was notable that he told you just days ago that he would respect the outcome of this verdict regardless of what happens. We know that is something that the former president has not done after he was found guilty on 34 counts of falsifying business records and that hush money trial there in Manhattan. We know he has tried to undermine the justice system entirely. The White House so far, David, as of now, has not commented, but we know that they are watching this and following it very closely. Just that image of the First Lady walking out of that courtroom hand in hand with Hunter Biden just underscores how close this family is. And the president has not really commented much on this federal investigation. He says that he would not do that, but he did make clear to you that he has completely ruled out the possibility of pardoning his son. In a statement, the White House and the president said that they have boundless support and love for their son, Hunter Biden. We know that the president has talked about how he's been on the straight and narrow, how he's so proud of his son, Hunter, and just the First Lady making, really going through extraordinary efforts to be there to show support for Hunter Biden. We know that she traveled to France only to turn right back around to attend the trial the day that Naomi Biden, the granddaughter, was testifying in this case, and then flew right back to Paris. But so far, David, as of now, the president is here at the White House, but no word yet from the president yet.
Rachel Scott live at the White House. Rachel, thank you. Let's get back to Terry Moran outside that courthouse in Wilmington, Delaware. Terry, an extraordinary scene to watch the First Lady leave that courthouse holding her son's hand.
It really was, David, and it reminds us that for all of the major implications of the first conviction of the child of a president, this trial inside the courtroom, like virtually every criminal trial, was a personal story of personal tragedy, a family tragedy. The guilty verdicts that the jury has handed down on Hunter Biden were verdicts not just on his conduct under law, but on his collapse into drug addiction and the consequences of it. So many American families understand that, and now the first family has gone through it as well. The political consequences of it, may be tempered by the fact that this is a scourge that has touched so many American families, even the president's.
You bring up a good point, Terry, because addiction has affected so many families in this country in one way or another. And unfortunately, I think what the Hunter Biden defense team has learned and the Biden family has learned here is that that's not what was on trial today, the issue of addiction, because I think that's on that level, many Americans can relate to the tragedy within this family.
That's a great point. And the jurors, too, several of the jurors in voir dire, when they were questioning the potential jurors, they talked about the experience of addiction in their own family. At one point, Hunter Biden kind of nodded as one of the prospective jurors who ended up on the jury talked about how the consequences of addiction for one of her friends was she died from a drug overdose. And you could almost sense in the way he sat there that they'll understand. But there's a flip side to it. People do understand the terrible consequences of addiction, the consequences under law as well. And the jurors here were sworn to do their duty under law, applied the law to the tragic facts in this case, as so many jurors do across the country in cases like this. And Hunter Biden is now a convicted felon.
We know both sides, Terry, helping to select that jury. And I just want to read for the viewers at home watching our breaking coverage here. Hunter Biden found guilty on all 3 felony counts, gun-related charges for lying about when he bought that firearm, about his illegal drug use. Terry, I want to bring you back in on this point because a couple of the jurors, this just gives a background on some of the jurors. And you mentioned this a moment ago, but just here's a little greater detail. One of the jurors, a woman whose sister was convicted about 10 years ago of credit card fraud and drug charges in Delaware, the law catching up with her sister. One male juror's father had been killed in a crime involving a gun. His brother went to jail for possession of a narcotic. Another woman on the panel had a husband who was a gun owner and was formerly in law enforcement. So several members of that jury deeply connected on a number of issues here. And on the one hand, as you point out, Hunter Biden and his team were hoping they might have some, I guess, empathy or compassion, if you will, given their own life experience. But on the other hand, they've all been intimately involved and have watched the law at work within their own families.
Absolutely, and that actually may have worked against Hunter Biden. Anyone, and virtually every American family has been touched in one form or another by addiction. People who they understand that addicts are liars, that they may not have been before the drug addiction, but that's part of the craving, that they'll do anything. They'll lie, they'll commit crimes, they'll do anything, and that may have harmed Hunter Biden in this case. The sense that people have an experience of the wreckage that addiction causes in the character of people. This is a reckoning, really, for that passage of his life, and yet sitting in there, I must say, listening to his own voice, reading his memoir, this is from the dark years of his life, but it sounds as if he's gotten his life straight. And that, regardless of what the law has to say about his conduct, is all that his family and those who love him could wish for.
Terry Moran, stay with us here. We're coming up on 15 minutes before noon in the East. For many of you here in the East, your local news is coming up here at noon, and we'll go to your local news when it comes on. We are standing by for potential comment from the prosecution. If that happens in the next 10, 15 minutes or so, we'll bring that to you live. In the meantime, I want to bring back our chief legal analyst, Dan Abrams. And for viewers who are joining us in progress here for our live coverage, just bring us up to speed on what you think potentially Hunter Biden could face here.
So potentially, theoretically, he could be facing up to 25 years in prison. These are felony charges, unlike the tax charges that he's going to be facing in September, which are misdemeanors. These are felonies. So you're talking about the possibility of serious prison time. But because these were felonies that were committed not in the context of another crime, the fact that he is a first-time offender, the fact that the gun that he was lying for was not used in a crime. All of those things will work in his favor such that I think most would be surprised if he were to get prison time for this. But remember, there's something else to keep in mind here. With this tax case looming in September, if he is convicted in that case, this conviction could be used against him in the context of sentencing in that case. So let's even assume for a moment he gets no prison time in connection with this case. Then he's convicted in the tax case. At that point, he's a convicted felon. And as a result, that could end up enhancing any possible sentence in connection with the tax crime. So there's a lot to still wait and see what happens here. As you and I were talking about earlier, remember, the president ultimately has the final say on federal crimes. This is a DOJ prosecution. As a result, the president could decide to step in some way, shape, or form after the election, if he were to so choose. That's another thing to keep in mind when thinking about the reality of Hunter Biden ever going to prison.
Quick follow-up for you, Dan, because you make this point that these felonies did not happen in the context of another crime. And that brings up another important question in this case, which is how often have you seen, if at all, a prosecution when it's not in the context of another crime?
Right. So there have been other cases where this crime has been charged alone, but there's never been, I haven't been able to find another case where you've had this set of facts where this crime has been prosecuted, meaning that there was just one gun, that it was not used in another crime, that the person had no criminal record, and there were no other crimes committed in general. Under those sets of facts, I don't think there's been another federal prosecution, which is why, as we talked about earlier, initially, the prosecutors seemed willing to agree not to prosecute this case. But when that plea deal fell through, the book got thrown at Hunter Biden, the tax charges were all filed, this felony gun charge was filed, and there's a very different question of, is there a technical violation of the law versus is this the kind of case that's typically charged? And that is not the technical question is not the one that helps Hunter Biden.
And take us, if you will, into the thought process behind once the plea deal fell apart, not offering a guilty plea here for perhaps a lesser sentence. This was somewhat of a legal gamble in proceeding with the case, going straight to trial, and not offering a guilty plea, months back when this plea deal fell apart.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think that they believed they had an arguable defense. As you heard John Carl and some of the others talking about earlier, members of Hunter Biden's team were hoping for an acquittal or a hung jury. They thought they had a real shot at that. And if you think that, then you probably don't want to make a deal to just plead guilty. But I think in the context of this sort of case, that it still will remain unlikely that he'll get prison time. And that typical sort of acceptance of responsibility that would help so much may not be as significant. And by the way, I think that may be the same equation that applies in Donald Trump's hush money case, where typically you would say someone needs to accept responsibility for what they did. And yet, I think in that case and in this case, you're going to see a judge in two separate cases, one federal, one state, that will simply decide the sentence based on the very specifics of this case, the crime that was committed and the context of everything surrounding it. When it comes to judges and sentences, you can't ignore that. There is no metric, right? There is no statistics to use where the judge will literally just sort of evaluate this and that. And then they'll go through the process of saying, here are the mitigating factors, here are the aggravating factors. But in the end, it ends up being a judgment call for the judge.
Dan Abrams with us here. Dan, stick with us as we continue our live coverage here. Hunter Biden, the president's son. This is the first time, and we've witnessed a lot of history together here from this news desk, and this is yet another case of that. First time a president's son found guilty. 3 felony counts, as you've heard Dan Abrams report here, Terry Moran as well. Next up will be the sentencing, though Dan believes, given the circumstances of this case, he will not get anywhere close to the 25 years behind bars he could potentially face here, though entirely up to the judge in this case. Of course, we are in the middle of a presidential campaign. President Biden seeking a second term. Former President Donald Trump hoping to return to the White House. I want to bring in John Karl. And John, regardless again of what people think about either of these two men in this race for president, we are aware of the political arguments in this country. You heard Dan Abrams there talk about, just from a legal standpoint, how rare this kind of prosecution is, given the facts of this case. And now you have a guilty verdict on all 3 counts. Knowing that, and knowing that the argument on the other side against President Biden was that the system was rigged against Donald Trump, even though it was a New York case, not a federal case. We know the facts here, but it would be very hard for that same argument to be applied to this case involving the president's son, given the fact that there are guilty verdicts here now on 3 felony counts, and given what the president told me just days ago, that he would respect the outcome, even in a case involving his son.
I mean, it really blows up the argument that the justice system here is rigged. Dan Abrams essentially made the case that Hunter Biden would be unlikely to be prosecuted at all in this if his last name were Smith. You could make the case that he was prosecuted here because he was a Biden, and there was so much pressure on this special counsel to pursue a case and to show that there is no favoritism whatsoever. It's extraordinary to think about how this case came to be. The investigation ultimately began under President Trump in the during the Trump administration, and President Biden becomes president. He appoints Merrick Garland as the Attorney General, and Merrick Garland allows this investigation to go forward with absolutely no interference, obviously, coming from the White House. This investigation goes forward despite the fact that the President of the United States himself said on the record, "My son did nothing wrong." And yet that president did nothing to interfere with the Justice Department. His Attorney General did nothing to interfere with this investigation. In fact, elevated it to a special counsel. And here you have the president's son now convicted of 3 very serious felonies and facing the very real possibility of jail time. And again, no interference coming from either President Biden's Attorney General or from the White House. It really gets right to this point. You hear over and over again from the Trump campaign, from Donald Trump himself, from Republicans, that the system is rigged, that the system is rigged in such a way as to go after Donald Trump. Well, here you have, yes, Donald Trump was convicted by a local court in New York. Here you have a federal prosecution of the president's son, and a pretty extraordinary one at that.
John, I know that you track interviews, transcripts right along with me during this political campaign, and I did take note of an interaction Donald Trump had in recent days with an interviewer where he talked about addiction and talked about how he has witnessed it himself within his own, friends, family, his lifetime, not from a personal perspective, but witnessed it around him, and acknowledged the pain that comes with addiction for so many families.
Yeah, I mean, President Trump's own brother, Fred Trump Jr., battled alcoholism throughout his life and died early as a result. I mean, I saw Donald Trump in the 2016 campaign address the issue of fentanyl addiction, and actually there was an event in Iowa where he showed some real compassion towards a man who got up and talked about how his son had died from an overdose. I mean, this is an issue that affects so many families across the country. Virtually everybody in this country either has a family member or an acquaintance or knows somebody who has struggled with addiction. And as we talked about earlier, Hunter Biden spoke with great candor, has spoken with great candor about his battle with crack addiction, a battle that went through various attempts at rehab, a battle that very nearly cost him his life on several occasions. He's written about it all in kind of searing detail in a book that came out, by the way, just after President Joe Biden was sworn in as president of the United States. This is an issue that affects virtually everybody in this country.
Yeah, and the irony here, John, is that that great candor you speak of, those very words, as Terry Moran has reported every night here on World News Tonight, were used against him to make this case in court. The jury listening and convicted him. John, thank you. Guilty on all 3 felony counts. Let's take it back to the White House. Rachel Scott live at the White House. And Rachel, of course, all eyes. No one is forgetting that Hunter Biden's the one directly affected by this. Sentencing comes next for him, but all eyes will be on both President Biden and on Donald Trump as to how they're going to handle this piece of news. They'll certainly be pressed on this today and in the days ahead, what their messaging will be. President Biden telling me in Normandy in recent days he'll respect the outcome of this trial. He'll respect the jury no matter what their verdict would be, was the question. He said yes, and of course guilty on all 3 felony counts. I did ask the president, would you ever pardon your son, Hunter Biden? Have you ruled out a pardon? And he said yes. So what he says moving forward is a big question mark on the campaign trail, how he couches this whole very deeply personal issue within the Biden family. But on a very public stage now with him running for re-election. And of course how Donald Trump handles this as well. As you heard John say just moments ago, Donald Trump has talked about addiction and the effects he witnessed firsthand within his own family, how he handles this major development on the campaign trail as well. 2 open-ended questions at this hour.
Absolutely, David. And look, on the surface of this, these are 2 entirely different cases between Hunter Biden and former President Donald Trump. But on the basis and that very question of just respect for the legal system, of course, we've heard former President Donald Trump undermine the legal system. David, we are just receiving a statement now from President Biden. This is just coming in. I want to read to you what it says. The president has said in a new statement, as I said last week, I'm the president, but I'm also a dad. Jill and I love our son, and we are so proud of the man he is today. So many families who have loved ones who have battled addiction understand the feeling of pride, seeing someone you love come out on the other side and be so strong and resilient in recovery. As I also said last week, I will accept the outcome of this case and will continue to respect the judicial process as Hunter considers an appeal. Jill and I will always be there for Hunter and the rest of our family with our love and support. Nothing will ever change that. David, this is a new statement from the president reacting to this verdict just moments ago. This just came out. And again, you're already seeing it here, just the sharp contrast between the president and his rival in this election, former President Donald Trump, who has accused the president of weaponizing the judicial system. The president making it clear today he will absolutely respect the outcome and the verdict in this case, David.
Breaking news coverage here on ABC News right now of Hunter Biden, the president's son. Rachel, thank you. They're live at the White House. The president's son found guilty on all 3 felony charges by a jury in Wilmington, Delaware. As Rachel just reported, the breaking headline right now coming in from the White House, the statement from President Biden himself saying, I'm the president, but I am also a dad. He talked about being proud of his son having come out on the other side of addiction. He talked about the fact that families across this country can understand that anyone who's been touched by addiction, the president referencing in a way what he told me last week during that interview in Normandy, saying, but we will respect the outcome of the judicial process. He will respect the verdict from that jury. An appeal is now ahead. For many of you, your local news is coming up next. I'll see you for World News Tonight. Good day.